Bonsoir, Monsieur, Dames. Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Welcome at Salon Luitpold at its best. We gonna have a discussion tonight in English to make it easier for the four of us. There's no problem, it's okay, we manage. I have the honor to introduce a quite famous panel. Maybe Gaspard Koenig will tell us something about his ambition at the end of the... No? Okay. Then I will tell you. We are discussing tonight about AI and ethics. What policies, what societal decisions do we need to give ourselves a future perspective as individuals? The web is more a social invention than a technical one. Tim Berners-Lee, inventor of the World Wide Web. I, for myself, and you too actually, very honored to have Axel Klopprogge in the middle, who we owe the evening tonight, actually. He took the initiative to bring us together, to bring Gaspard from France. He just arrived by train, and he especially came tonight for this event. And I have the task to present Axel, and he will then present the two co-speakers. Mr. Klopprogge is an engineer. He studied at RWTH Aachen. He has worked for many years in very prominent positions at Daimler, Airbus, and MAN. He was responsible up to 80,000 employees. Afterwards, he founded his own international consultancy firm in the fields of human resource management, innovation, and business development. He's board member of an association called Going Across. He has researched and published on the digitalization of the future of HR and is one of the authors of the Digital HR Manifesto. He has held teaching positions in Germany, Spain, and Sweden. Thank you, Axel, for being here. Thank you very much. So we're gonna let them discuss for about 1 hour, and then it's up to you. We're gonna take questions in German, French, and English, so feel free to prepare yourself and to help us to get to some interactions after, as I just said, approximately 1 hour. So let's discuss. It's your floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Stefan, for setting the stage, and a warm welcome to everybody here in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, due to the fact that some people here in the room know me personally, I have to correct one thing. I studied at the Technical University of Aachen, but I'm not an engineer. I belong to the few people who do less useful things. I studied history and German literature, and I have a doctor in philosophy. So, but even with this education background, one can do the one or the other useful thing. And thank you for having this room here with this in the old French tradition of discussing and eating and drinking, to which we have to wait still a bit. So we refused the offer to get a beer or a wine. So, but maybe there's one thing everybody shares in this room, and this is that if you want or not, we all will have a lot of experience with artificial intelligence. Maybe today 10 or 100 times, and maybe often without knowing it. If you look at the news about the negotiations to get a new government in Germany, and if you look at the programs of the political parties, there is digitization, and artificial intelligence is one of the key bullets, and it will provide us with a bright future. And then maybe if you look at the word of intelligence, maybe in the past we thought this is something reserved for human beings, and now suddenly it's a word something which can be produced artificially. So I think this topic, if we want or not, has a lot to do with us, and so I think it's important to know more about it and not just believe in the words and all the praises which go around in the world. And I'm very proud today to have two true experts. And I'm very sorry, but Gaspard is not here as a future president of France. He's just here as a philosopher and artificial intelligence expert. So the first person is Gaspard Koenig, is a highly unusual figure in the world of philosophy. He's already quite well known in France, but had yet to be discovered elsewhere in the world and in Germany. Brilliantly educated and a connoisseur of his subject, he does not pursue philosophy from his desk, however, but explores the world, collects facts and examines arguments, and only then addresses philosophical questions to it. And he not only wants to understand the world, he also wants to change the world. This is a sentence from Karl Marx. I don't know if he is really happy with it, but
big sign in Berlin.
yeah. He was politically active for Christine Lagarde. He founded a think tank for the promotion of liberalism, is currently founding a party, and for his book, just translated from French, Das Ende des Individuums, Reise eines Philosophen durch die Welt der Künstlichen Intelligenz. He traveled around the world for months, meeting more than 120 actors of various tribes. And it was only from this that Gaspard Koenig, who is rather technophile, but increasingly disturbed by his research, arrived at his provocative question: is artificial intelligence the new communism? Our second guest is Professor Christoph Lütge, so welcome to the home game in Munich. He holds a chair of business ethics at the Technical University of Munich. He's a director of the Institute for Ethics in Artificial Intelligence, which was founded in 2019. Christoph Lütge studied business, informatics, and philosophy. He has held visiting professorships in Taipei, Kyoto, and Venice. Among other things, he is a member of the Ethics Commission for Automated and Connected Driving of the German Federal Ministry of Transport. Of course, there are numerous publications by him, some of the current ones available on the book table there afterwards, for example, on ethics in artificial intelligence and robotics. His core message is: artificial intelligence will not fly without ethics. Without trust in artificial intelligence, people will not use it. So, I would first like to give the two guests with some questions and answers, and maybe they start discussing among themselves, to explain their views in the conversation, and then of course after about an hour we will open the discussion and everybody is invited to ask questions, to give comments, or to give different opinions. So my first question is to both of you: is digitalization and artificial intelligence have become something like magic words? They seem to describe something that will solve all problems. If we don't understand, doesn't matter. But one thing is clear: if you have any doubts about it, you are old-fashioned. And I can confirm this, especially in the context of companies where it really has become a magic word. When trying to understand what distinguishes artificial intelligence from other forms of mechanization or automatization or computers of the past, then very often definitions go into cycles. The great thing, then you can read, the great thing about artificial intelligence is that it's intelligent. So, thank you very much. And of course, there are the typical fears that robots and super intelligence will take over the world, and of course, we will all lose our jobs. Therefore, my very first and very naive question at the beginning is, what the hell is artificial intelligence for you? So, Gaspard, we start with you.
Thank you, Axel. Hello, everybody. I'm really sorry that I have to express myself in English and spoil the evening for all of us, but we'll try to do our best. So, in order to address your question, Axel, I will also come back on your point about magics. And during my world tour on AI, so I'm not a specialist of AI, obviously. I fight for liberty, I would say, in general. And obviously, today AI is part of the threats that hang on our freedoms. So as a philosopher or a freedom fighter, I thought it was part of my duties to spend 2 years to study that subject in the books, but also to go around the world, in the US, but also in China, in Israel, in Denmark, in the UK, obviously in France, to see what's happening, see who the actors of the fields are, what they think, how they behave, how they live their lives, how they educate their children. And actually, they all educate their children by restricting access to computers, which is an interesting point for people who spend their life on TED Talks saying that AI will save the world. And anyway, and as Axel said, in terms of intellectual tradition, I'm rather progressist, technophile. So I was intrigued and rather fascinated by those technologies, which in themselves are obviously tools that we can use for the best. In medicine, nobody would contest that the use of AI allows better diagnosis, for instance. But I come back on the definition and the magical point. So among those people that I went to visit, I went to Los Angeles and I came to visit a magician, a proper magician, a person whose job is to be a magician, an illusionist. And he was of the few, if not the only person in the world to have reproduced the Mechanical Turk. Have any of you heard about the Mechanical Turk? So the Mechanical Turk was this automaton that was built by an engineer in the 18th century. And it was a person dressed as a Turk. He was behind a desk, which was a chess table. And he was a pure automaton. He was able to draw the chess figures, yeah, on the table and to defeat the best minds of the time, including Napoleon, including Benjamin Franklin. And so it was a big talk in town, and he was doing the tour in the Salon of Europe, in Paris, in London, in Germany. And for 40 years, people were marveling at this automaton, and books were written asking whether it was proper intelligence, human intelligence, or artificial intelligence. And it was the times where authors from the Enlightenment were thinking that we were only machines ourselves. And so if the mind was a machine, then it was only logical that a machine could also do the job of a human being. So these were exactly the same discussions as those that we have today. Now, I went to see the reproduction of that Mechanical Turk. And that magician showed me the trick, at least part of the trick. And that trick was discovered only, I think, in 1820, 1830. And that trick is so simple and ridiculous that I'm almost ashamed to break it. And the trick was that under the table there was a proper human and a chess master. But he was very well concealed because there was a play of mirrors and different mechanics, so you couldn't see him. And at the beginning of the representation, the magician would open the drawer and show that there was nobody inside. In fact, there was somebody inside. And so he was actually drawing the chess figures. Now, that's not anecdotal. That Amazon called its microtasking platform for AI the Amazon Mechanical Turk. They're quite clever. And you know what the microtasking platform is about? When you are a researcher in AI and you want to build an algorithm to recognize a cat, what do? you ask hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of humans to label pictures of a cat, so that then the machine will be able to make a correlation. So humans, proper humans, you and me, will use their causal reasoning in order to identify cats on pictures. And then the machine will make not causal reasoning, but correlation. And the point of this story is that behind the magic, there is a very simple trick. There's a human that produced either the move of the chess figure or the labeling of the cat. And the machine is just an appearance. So if you're a philosopher, if you think that philosophy, since the sophist from Plato, is about distinguishing illusion from reality, well, you can say very simply, very plainly, without going into the technique of AI, that AI is not a replication of human mind. It's an imitation of human mind. So it only exists because people produce their own intellectual output, because humans are able to label cats. Which means that when you see a headline saying extraordinary, an AI beats the 10 best doctors to identify cancer cells and tumors on a scan. You think, okay, if you present it that way, it's quite magical. But what happened in reality? In reality, that algorithm, that AI, has been built by asking tens of thousands of students in medicine to label pictures of tumor cells on scans, and then the machine made a correlation that no human mind is able to make. So the real headline would be 10,000 doctors and researchers and students put together have beaten the 10 top doctors in China, and that's only very normal and very logical. So my conclusion from that is that, metaphysically speaking, there's nothing really new or nothing really to worry about in terms of AI. And the phantasm of superintelligence is not a fantasy of computer scientists. It's a fantasy of physicians. People who wrote about superintelligence, like Bostrom, like Tegmark, they are physicians. Physicians obsessed by the possibility of an extremely unlikely event. You know, they're fascinated by black holes, by the disparition of the sun. That's what drives them. And so they take that very little possibility that the machine will get out of hand and try to manage our world and try to eliminate humans or enslave humans. But that's far, far, far out of the real challenge of AI. And to me, the real challenge of AI, in terms of how it applies to our humanity, and then now in political terms or moral terms, is about free will. My concern is not about the loss of jobs. It's about the fact that we are taking the habit to delegate our decision-making capacity to the machine in very small choices, like which street I will take to reach my destination, but also increasingly in very big choices of life, like education, health, love. I went to meet with the conceptors of dating platforms in China, in France. And you have to understand that they are not trying to fulfill your desires and to provide you with the best outcome for you. They are managing their community. And so they are trying to dispatch the offer and the demand and to make them coincide. So they are not neutral, that's my point. And they are influencing your behavior in a way that you cannot control. And I met with neuroscientists who work for big tech platforms. These are doctors in neuroscience. They know how our brain works. And they know where to press the button to obtain a certain output. And they know how to make profit out of this output in order to essentially recover the maximum of data from your behavior, from your actions. And this question of free will is at the heart of an academic debate in the US. The question of free will is as ancient as philosophy. It's always been discussed. It's been discussed in between Erasmus and Calvin. It's been discussed by Spinoza. It's been discussed. I mean, we always have the same long-standing discussion. But now in the US, there is this consensus, this academic consensus that free will is an illusion. It's theological. It doesn't exist. It's not materialistic enough. And there is a combination of neurosciences, behavioral economics, and experimental psychology from Kahneman, who is really the master, the intellectual master of Silicon Valley, Daniel Kahneman, who are actually explaining full of, biases, neuro-biases, that we don't know what's good for ourselves, that our behaviors are determined by forces that we cannot control, and that in that environment it is legitimate, it is morally legitimate to nudge us towards the best outcome, even if we don't want it or even if we don't know it. And it's only against this intellectual and scientific background that those platforms are developing algorithms that are doing exactly that. And just to finish and present my view on the subject, my personal conclusion is that we have to use, obviously, these are techniques that we want to use, that are very useful, helpful, but they are politically motivated, they are utilitarian, and we want to be able to make, within that environment, our own choices, because free will is not a given, it's a construction. So in order to gain that sentiment of acting with our own will, we need to exercise it. And in order to do that, we need to recover control on our data. And that's why the concluding part of the book is an idea that I borrow, obviously, from other scientists, other researchers, that we should, legally speaking, create a private ownership on personal data. Today, your data don't belong to you. It doesn't exist anywhere in the world. It's not in the law. It's not considered as a good. And my point is that if we were to set that up, it's just a word in our local code that our data belong to us just like a car belongs to us, just like an ID in terms of patent belong to us, then that would change the power struggle between the individual and the platform, and that will allow us to be freer in our choices. So I'm happy to develop with many other examples, but I'll first give the floor to my Gespräch partner.
Thank you, Gaspard. So I think we will... we will have the opportunity to go deeper in some of your messages. But first of all, I would give the same opportunity to Christoph. Maybe he has a completely different view on artificial intelligence. And let's remember my naive question, is there a possibility to give a definition or explanation which we can understand?
I think that's a very good question, because when we wrote this book, it's only a short introduction to AI ethics and robotics and ethics. We wrote one chapter, what is AI? And now, after 1.5 years, this chapter has become the most read thing that I've ever written on apps like ResearchGate. So I was so surprised to see this happening. So that is a very fundamental question. What is AI? And when we wrote this chapter, so with several of my co-authors, we found several definitions, like you said, which are circular, which are exactly circular, which are referring to something they are trying to define. personally like very much one definition which gives certain characteristics of AI systems, which say that they have to be in a correct way interpret data, they have to learn from this data, and they have to be able to flexibly adapt based on this data. And a lot could be said about this. But one important point, and maybe there's a connection to what Gaspard just said, I think it's a mistake to define AI along the lines, how close is it to human intelligence? I think that's really a fundamental mistake that has been made a lot, and several of the definitions make it, whereas the one I just referenced to does not do it. So I would also, for me, in my work and the work that we're doing at my institute, I would always keep in mind this is not something that is intended to, maybe intended, but should not imitate human beings, but it's something different. For example, this question becomes very practical when we think about robots in care robots. And that was always the question, should they look rather like human beings or rather not? And at first, and I mean, they are already around, especially in countries like Japan, for example, or Korea to some extent. At first, people thought they should look very human-like. But then, when they started to ask the people who were working or who were living with them, elderly people, they found out it is better actually not to make them look like human beings. And people were rather more comfortable with these robots when they were not looking like a human being, but they felt more they felt more dignified actually to have something around that was a machine and that looked like a machine. So this is maybe just one example for this thesis, and I think this holds the same for many other aspects of AI. You mentioned the line that I like to give: AI will not fly without ethics, and I think this is very important. AI is unlike other technologies, and in the way that it will need ethical considerations for it to work. Because if people do not trust in the technologies, they will just not use it. And the companies, at my institute, for example, a lot of companies are approaching us who are working on AI, small startups, but also larger companies, and they feel, they find, not just feel, it's really empirical fact, many of the problems they need to solve when developing AI systems are not technical problems, but they are ethical problems in the widest sense. Ethical problems or governance problems. Should it be programmed this or that way? So that's why I think companies are recognizing that and seeking to find ways of integrating ethics into that. However successful that was, I will not answer now, but I think that's a question that many have already on their agenda.
Thank you very much. I would like to insist a bit more and dig a bit deeper on this question of the relation between human beings and computers. Of course, there's a question, should they look like computers and things like this. From my own experience, I've seen that the magic words of artificial intelligence include terms like data-driven decisions, predictive analytics, or even prescriptive analytics. So that means the old dream of humans: make no mistakes and know the future in advance. So my question to you, maybe we start this time with you, Christoph, can artificial intelligence know something about the future? And if so, what is the source of this wisdom? Where the hell does artificial intelligence know anything about the future?
That's very simple. It's machine learning or deep learning or whatever. So it's a learning mechanisms. And I agree with Gaspard. This is, of course, it's not magic at all. And it's actually, for many of the older AI scientists, this is rather trivial. And they, for a long time, they have been saying, well, this is not AI. But, well, we cannot overlook the fact that this AI is doing something now which we thought it could not do. For example, in all of your smartphones that you have now programs, apps that detect voice and that can process natural language, which was very hard to do for a long time. And it took a while, many years to develop, and for several years people laughed about it, what it could do. But at some point, suddenly, wow, this is really working. You can talk to it. So, yeah.
Let me insist again. So, I know these words, collecting data and machine learning, all these words I know. But data means something given. That means data is something of the past. This is, where should it come from?
Yeah.
So that means, how you can have many datas, but how is there a necessary way which leads to the future? And if you can predict the future, will the future come even if we all sit on the sofa and wait without doing anything about it?
Well, I mean, AI would not be the first technology to tell us something about the future. I mean, any technological system that can, for example, say something about the mechanisms, the laws of nature, whatever, can in some way, if you want, predict what could happen at least.
Yeah, but we speak about human.
Technology.
Yeah.
Technologies. I mean, if, for example, I have projects about autonomous driving, and an autonomous car gets a lot of data from various sources and must be able to predict what will happen. Most probably at the next crossroads, otherwise it would be very dangerous. And you're right to say, where does this data come from? From an ethics point of view, it's very important to insist that these data might be biased, and there might be a systematic bias in the data that you have, and that can be a problem. So I think that maybe it's a separate question, but yeah, so there might be ethical problems in the data that you use, and you have to be very careful what data you use to train your algorithm.
Mm-hmm. So I pass to Gaspard. Is there unevitable way from data to the future?
It's funny because it's exactly the question that Leibniz was asking, and Leibniz is considered as almost a sort of intellectual father of intellectual intelligence, because he would imagine the world as made only of data and scientific laws, and that everything could be predicted. And he asked exactly that question: if everything is determined, then should I go and try to save my neighbor when the house is on fire? Because it's written somewhere, so I shouldn't do anything. And then the conclusion is yes, but it's written that I should act. So in fact, I should exercise my will, because that's how God has conceived the world, in a world where I exercise my will. And in fact, it sort of addresses also your question. Because AI will know the future only if we behave like robots. That's the bottom line. Because it's based on the past, on the data collected from the past. So if we repeat our behavior, if we become ourselves robots, if we get extremely repetitive in what we do, in our habits, then obviously the future will be very well predicted based on past assumptions. And what we ought to do as humans is produce things that are unexpected, that are entirely new and creative. That's part of our mission, of our specificity probably, and introduce that divergence, which to me is synonymous to progress. And there I would oppose optimization, which is what Asia has in mind. We should optimize cities, optimize harbors, optimize behaviors, but that tends toward a form of inertia, because when you optimize, at some point, you produce and you provide well-being and efficiency, but in a very predictable world that becomes extremely stable and repetitive. Now, the very idea of human progress is the contrary. It's the opposite of optimization. Progress is based on mistakes, on divergence, on errors, including evolutionary biology is based on mistakes. It's because DNA doesn't replicate well. Social progress is based on mistakes. Architecture, nice architecture in Paris, is based not on planification process, but it's based on spontaneous order, because somebody in Le Marais, one of the most visited places on earth, was considered as a slum. And only because it was a slum, it's developed into something beautiful. You won't visit Shanghai as you visit Le Marais today, because Shanghai can be planned by an artificial intelligence. And we come on the point to planification, and the quote that you mentioned, that AI is communist, which I borrow actually from the investor Peter Thiel, who is an investor in AI, paradoxically, and also a libertarian. And the definition of totalitarianism is not really about a system of governance, but it's a society where all the information is gathered, where the information is complete, and where one single instance has the wholeness of the information. And that's been done by terrible political means before, but now it can be done by data gathering. And that's exactly where China is heading. And you can see that they have no issue with that. They have no issue with that because in their Confucian philosophy, what's good for the collective is good for the individual. And so if that optimizes the way the society functions, it's fine. Now we have a problem because we don't believe in optimization, we believe in progress. So we believe in error. So we want to protect the capacity for the individual to err, to do mistakes, to do bad things. And it's very difficult now. It's very difficult. Why? Because our systems, our liberal system, are based on the assumption for now 2 centuries that economic progress goes hand in hand with individual rights. That because we have property rights, because we have patents, because we have freedom of speech, we are more prosperous and we do it better than totalitarian countries. Now that equation is entirely dismantled, and those 2 terms are disconnected by the rise of AI. Because if you want to be very efficient, if you want to have economic power, then you need to gather as many data as possible and to restrict individual rights and diminish privacy as much as possible. And now our governments and the European Commission do have to do that terrible trade-off between liberty and efficiency that we didn't have to do before. And you can see in every of our countries, within each old political party, those two opposite tendencies. Some who say, no, we need to preserve rights, we need to preserve that capacity to diverge, even if it creates negative externalities to the collective. And others who say, but look at China, at Taiwan, at South Korea, how they manage well the pandemics, because they gather data immediately, and because they identify people and they send posts on their phones, and because they track them, then they could do better and they save life. And it's a very difficult counter-argument to make, to say, well, it's better to lose life, but preserve our privacy, our capacity to err, etc. And that's a new trade-off, and we're not accustomed to that. And even on in the public debate, it's very hard to make that argument, believe you me. So I think at the end of the day, you know, behind what you're saying, if we want to have a future, a real future, so something that's made of progress that we cannot anticipate today, then in the very long term, we have a strong interest into preserving our individual creativity, our individual fullness. But that's a very hard sell to do on the short term when you have to manage a pandemic, a terrorist threat, or whatever, or just the need to be economically competitive. And I can see that happening in France now, that a few center-right candidates, you know, sort of decent persons and politicians are now proposing to introduce facial recognition in public transportation in order to spot terrorists. And yes, maybe once in a while they will spot a terrorist through that means, but is it worth it? And the European Commission, interestingly, is going the other way and is making a proposal on AI that's just been published a few months ago, which says we should regulate the system to preserve free will of our citizens. It's written free will in a European text. I think it's very interesting. And on that ground, they want to ban facial recognition in the public space. So you see, that's only the start of the discussions that we need to have as a society. And I think our biggest interest is to preserve the values of enlightenment that are pretty, I think, worthwhile today to address our contemporary challenges. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And that's why I think classical liberalism can be very useful in regulating AI. And the sort of private property rights that I propose are just an extension of the classical ownership system of usus, fructus, and abusus, just transposed on data. So, yeah, so that's a big question of governance that's now in full discussion.
Christoph, you want to?
Maybe just one comment on that, because I think as well that classical liberalism is very important theory again today, and we should really remind ourselves of what the classical liberalists were really after, and saying, be aware, watch out for what can happen to your fundamental rights, and I think this is a very good lesson of recent time, and I think we have forgotten to some extent about the lessons of especially classical liberalism, and well, I just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, let's go on a bit on this topic. So,
can I just give an example of that, because it was a bit abstract, but a good example is the smart city and the regulation of the smart city. So we are far away from the smart city, but let's assume that in a not too distant future, we will have the technical possibilities to have cars that are entirely connected, when actually you don't even need road code anymore. You will just indicate your destination, and the system will optimize the different itineraries of millions of different cars, and will get you to your destination in minimum time. Now the question for the regulator is, should I preserve the capacity for a driver to drive disconnected without indicating where he wants to go, thus creating accident and traffic? And then should I force the insurance companies to contract with him so he is covered? Or, as a regulator, should I do exactly the opposite and make it compulsory that everybody should be connected in order to smoothen the traffic and to save lives, because let's assume it will avoid accidents? And you see, one option is utilitarian. The other option is classical liberal, based on, individualism in the good sense of the term.
Just one comment again, because I was in that commission for automated and connected driving in Germany, and we have faced exactly that question. And the question was, should the driver be allowed to override the system at any point? And this is very, very similar. And the engineers and technical people all said, of course not. That's the most dangerous thing to do, because the human being is the most dangerous element in the car.
yeah, but eventually we said no. From an ethical point of view, in the wide sense, we said no. We want autonomy to be a fundamental principle of these systems, and therefore we said no. We would, at least for the time being, allow the override at any point.
And already today, when you drive any car that's been built after 2015, all your data, and the most intimate data, which is geolocalization, go to the factory, to the builder. Go to Volkswagen, go to Renault, go to Audi, go to all those car companies. And when you buy your car, you can negotiate the color of the seat, the material of the seat. You can negotiate everything. You can add as many options as you want. But you are not allowed to negotiate the use of data. Even the way you brake is directly transmitted, and obviously now the European Commission is envisaging that those data should be collected in case of accidents, or even, you know, you would technically today be able, as a regulator, to fine people when they overspeed, because we know that they overspeed. Volkswagen know exactly when and where you overspeed. Now that raises the following question. What is to be a law-abiding citizen? Is it to take the decision not to overspeed when you're actually autonomous enough to do it or not? Or is it to be in a car that drives you at the right speed, where you actually don't take the decision to follow the law? You just don't have any other option. And if we think of what Kant was saying about autonomy, autonomy is about being autonomous from the teacher, from the preceptor, but it's also the power to be autonomous from the machine in order to be able to abide or not by the law. But that's the definition of citizenship, when you make that choice to obey a collective system because you think it's good, not because you have no alternative.
Thank you. I would come back. I would like to mention an example.
And so in my system of data ownership, you would automatically be able to negotiate with the seller of the car the use of data, because those data would by definition be yours. So you would say, okay, I paid 5,000 more or whatever, but I own the entirety of the data, I don't pass them on. And some would be comfortable in sharing those data, fine, they'll have a rebate on the car, because as you know, personal data is now 10% of GDP, so that's economic value that is for now not accounted for and not redistributed to those who produce the value, which is why Facebook should pay you, Amazon should pay you, because when Alexa is in your room, you know what happens. Alexa gives you a few tips on the weather, on whether to listen to jazz, or it's very primitive. But whenever Alexa is on, because you clicked on terms and conditions that you cannot understand or read or even less negotiate, you accepted that Alexa registers all your conversations in order to feed the natural language processing algorithm that you were mentioning before, in order to enhance the capacity for Amazon to build chat boxes. That's what you're doing, because then Amazon will record millions and millions and millions of human conversations in order to improve its systems. So in fact, you're working for Amazon. So not only you're paying Alexa 300, 500 euros, but on the top of it, you're working for free for that company. And obviously in a system of data ownership, well, first of all, you would have, from the start, the choice to accept that use of your data or not, because you would have your own terms and conditions on which the platform would click. It would be the opposite. And then if you want to share them, you'll be remunerated or compensated for that.
Many of these examples, and we heard some of them, are about autonomous driving and accidents, and there are the question if two children are hurt by an accident, how would you react? This is always quite extreme things. When you told your examples and your thesis, I was thinking of a much more normal situations, for instance, decision taken in companies. Then it's not about death, people, or maybe at least this is not on the table. But as I mentioned, this thing of data-driven decision, algorithms are supposed to give you advice and give you an objective, unbiased picture of the reality, recommend you which people you should hire and which not, and which you should fire before they do certain things, and so on and so on. There was in all my professional life, courage of managers was one of the positive characteristics a manager should have. At least this was written on paper. And there are many books written about courage in management. What does courage mean in the future? That you don't care of what the algorithm recommends you, that you go your way, that you say, okay, the system tells me this is the right person, but I take this one because it's, and if maybe then this person is wrong, what is this? This is a more normal life decision.
Yeah, and there will be many of these situations, especially in context of companies. Maybe not necessarily the top level decisions, but the intermediate ones, the intermediate level, and not the low level ones. I mean, many will be automated already, but the intermediate ones. I think courage will be a very important element to have, and hopefully many will still have it.
But courage is the enemy of artificial intelligence.
I would not necessarily say that. But you have to be, I mean, AI gives, and big data give you a lot of information which you did not have before. And this can be a good thing. And I would not always say this is a bad thing, because I give you an example. We have projects at my institute about AI and ethical considerations in hiring. How do you hire people? And there, of course, when you look at how this works without AI or similar systems, you cannot but notice that there's a lot of bias in people, in human beings, about what decisions do you take, and you can make a lot of mistakes also, which are at your own risk. But also, if at least if you want to eliminate or reduce, not eliminate, but reduce bias and enhance fairness in decisions, then AI could help you. I'm not saying it necessarily does, and it might create other problems, yes, but it might be a little more objective. There is this famous study about the judge that decides differently before and after lunch. Yes, as we all do. We have not eaten before, right? So
just to inform you, we didn't have anything.
I might be
before.
saying different things. No, but there. So AI can help you with the information it gives to reduce risk of bias and unfair decisions. So, but of course, I agree. The story is complex, and there are other problems with it.
Well, first of all, I think our dignity is to eliminate our own biases by recognizing them and then working on them. And if you delegate that to the machine, in fact, you don't do that work. And you keep your biases, but you're saying, okay, there is an objective system here, it's neutral, so it's fine, I can behave, however I want, because the decision has been taken by some external mechanism, so you don't improve yourself. And now I take it to the extreme, because I visited a sort of edgy startup in San Francisco, I think. And so they were doing that matchmaking between supply and demand in the work market. And I asked the guy who was jumping all over the place, one of the startup, like Californian guy. And so I tried to, put him in a place for 30 seconds and ask him a real question. So what's the future of the industry? What's the future of your industry? He said the future of the industry is that you come to us, you don't even have to say what sort of work you want, or which field you want to work in, or which position you want to achieve. You just give us maximum possible data. Anything, your social networks, your bank accounts, your geolocalization, everything. And then we'll put against that all the data from all the job offers in the country. We'll put that into the machine, and we'll give you the best job for you, even if it's something you had never thought of. But eventually we thought, you should work in that bakery because, in fact, it's close to your home, and we know that you like chocolate, and we know that you're good in cooking because we saw your social network, you're cooking such a thing, and there is a big future in this industry, and et cetera, et cetera. And the guy will say, oh, I was a banker, now I will work in a bakery. I didn't know that, but our machine tells me it's good for me, and it's good for society, right? So it improves the well-being of everybody, so let's do it. And so that's really what he told me, and it might work. It might work in a very repetitive work where people behave as they are supposed to behave because they behave as they behaved in the past. When in a world where they are in this cognitive bubble, that might very well work. Now, what do we lose? Well, in fact, and coming back to my first point, when you don't have made that decision to say, oh, I want to quit banking, I want to work in a bakery now, you know, that's a big decision. That's a decision, that's a life-changing decision. So it's a real decision. It's something where you play your life, something that you construct. And I had that, and that's worth it to have that, you know, decision-making space within you. And I had that discussion with Yuval Harari from Homo Sapiens. It's a bit controversial, but he says it in public, so I think I can break it. He said, well, when I was young, I was in pain because I didn't know I was homosexual from 15 to 18-year-old. And so I went through a lot of psychological trouble. And if an AI had been there and had spotted where my eyes were looking when I had a picture of a naked man and a naked woman on a computer, then he would have told me. And that would have avoided me a lot of suffering. And so that's good. And Harari is exactly at the same starting point than me. He's saying those systems are eliminating the very idea of free will and are killing liberalism. Because when you don't have free will, you don't have autonomy of choice, and you don't have responsibility, penal responsibility, economic responsibility, legal responsibility, and so on. And to which I respond. And why does he want to achieve that? Because he's a Buddhist. And as a Buddhist, he wants to eliminate suffering. He wants that people live as happy in terms of well-being as possible. Because he doesn't believe in the individuality. So my book is called The End of the Individual. My point is that going through those 3 years of suffering, and more generally for all of us, having breakdowns and complicated love story, is it something you want to avoid? Because it would be more comfortable if the computer would give you directly the right mate, as in an episode of Black Mirrors. Or is it in fact through that suffering, through that process, that you build a singular, unique personality that makes you really human? So at the end of the day, the question of AI that we're having today is, do we want to eliminate suffering? Or do we think that we, as individuals, as singular personalities that won't exist somewhere else, that it's worth that pain?
I remember a discussion I had some years ago, completely independent of artificial intelligence. It was about in a company which works in the area of elder people's care. And the question was, do we allow elder people, which maybe suffer from some mental diseases, to leave their rooms and fall and hurt themselves? Is this possible? Is this allowed? And the question was yes. And from the ethical point of view, what would you say? Is it allowed to suffer, or is it more ethical to prevent any suffering? Huh?
Yeah, I think this is a fundamental question, and I think I'm very much there with you, Gaspard, that these are risks that only individuals can decide on. No one can take these decisions for yourself, and if you decide not to use that kind of, I mean, for example, watches or smart watches that can detect if you fall, we have that now, but if you don't use it, you don't use them. I mean, and that might be a problem, for example, if an insurance company exactly would say, well, we are giving you a discount. Although I would still see a slight difference between giving a discount or penalizing that or sanctioning from the state. But I agree that this is a problem. So no, life is a risk in itself, right? and we need to, no one can take that decision from you.
My question is, so for instance, when I came to this place today, so I used the public transport and I bought a ticket with this public transport app, and it tells you, even from home, from your home address, it tells you how to walk and how many minutes, when the train comes, which train you should take. It tells you then from the train station to get to here, and even give you warnings if a train is delayed or something like this. So I'm sure there's a lot of artificial intelligence behind, and I don't know, maybe 100 algorithms and so on. But to be honest, I'm not afraid of it. I don't, at least maybe I'm naive, but I don't see any ethical problems there. I'm not afraid of becoming a communist by buying this ticket and so on. But my question is it possible simply to scale, to transfer this example to other things? So if a system is able to provide me with the best ticket at the best price, at the best time, and so on, can it also recommend me the best decision in a business situation, provide me with the best partner at home, with the best wife or the best husband, and maybe even warn me about topics I shouldn't mention today, so like with the warnings of this traffic app, or find the best employee for the team. So my question is it all the same? Or are there some hidden red lines which we should be careful with? So for maybe it's no problem to buy a ticket, to get a recommendation for a ticket, or maybe it's a problem to get a recommendation for your wife. But where are the red lines? Where are the reds? How do we recognize them? Yes? You start. How long is it ago that you found your wife? So maybe it's without or with.
Yeah, you would like to know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know how fast are these decisions taken. I mean, it might be good. I mean, people certainly might like to have more information. The question is, are you forced to use that? I mean, I think no system, and I don't think even the most authoritarian government would force you to use that kind of some kind of system to decide on your wife. I think. However, I agree that there is a problem because, for example, we find that even for serious business decisions, which might cost the company hundreds of millions, there often now there is a lot of information that is gathered by systems, by big data systems. Yeah, I won't make the distinction here now between AI and big data, but it's not exactly the same. But let's, for the sake of the argument, say, well, a lot of information is gathered, and those C-level managers who are about to decide on it have this information. And do they use it? Do they take the same decision, or do they have courage maybe to deviate from that decision? And that can be a serious problem. We find in a number of studies that in more than 90% they go with the decision that is being recommended by the system, and that, I think, can create a problem. I mean, it's not totally new with AI. We have seen that before when the first computer systems were used at the stock market, and we found they all aligned on it, and that created problems in itself, and so on and so on. But it's not totally new, but it can. I think there's a danger that it creates a new dimension. So the courage again is very important.
I'll try to analyze your example. So first of all, is it really the best decision that the system gave you? And there, I remember I met a researcher in Berkeley, and he's been a professor in Berkeley for 30 years, so he was really used to the place, used to the roads around the university. And he told me, every morning I'm beating Google Maps. Because I know the place so well that I know exactly which road to take to go faster than Google Maps. And there's a lot in that. Because the directions that Google Maps gives you is not the best direction for you. Is the best direction for you and for the other users. So that they split the users in order to enhance the global traffic. So his decision was a selfish decision. If you want to abide by the collective, if you're Chinese, you will take the suggestion of Google Maps because that's what's best for the community. And again, that's why I'm saying that those systems are utilitarians. Because utilitarianism doesn't give you the best option for you. It's trying to improve the well-being of the entirety of the group, even at the detriment of some particular individuals. So first of all, it's not sure it's the best decision. Do I have the right to be selfish? Do I have the right to take the direct route? I think yes. And I think that's a big question in our society, whether we maintain that right to be selfish. And you know, it's exactly the same question for sanitary measures that we all went through. Now, second point. Is it, what you're saying, Axel, what you're asking is it really serious if I give up, you know, small decisions, like which street I'm taking, which ticket I'm buying? But there was a study that was made on the brains of professional drivers. And so they follow the route that's been given by the computer all day long. I can tell you the drivers in Paris, they don't even know where the Eiffel Tower is. They are just following the route. And then they analyze the brain. And they saw that after a couple of months of that regime, there are some parts of the brains that become atrophied. And that are the parts that are specialized in decision making. So when you give up on small things, in fact, are you still able to make big decisions? So what I do myself, when I use Google Maps, because indeed it often gives me a rather good indication, I remove the geolocalization. So I'm seeing the itinerary, that's the recommendation, but then I'm still exercising my brain because I decide whether now I take a left or a right, and maybe there's a street that's a bit more, I don't know, leafy, or that suits me better or whatever, or there is somebody interesting on the other side of the pavement, and I will diverge. So I would just use it as a base, as a base of a recommendation. And then regarding red lines, the whole point of the system I'm proposing of data ownership is that everybody would then be able to choose his or her red lines to enshrine them into his smart data wallet once and for all, if you want, in terms of which data, because depending which data you agree to give, that gives you the sort of nudge that you're willing to have. If you don't give any data, then you won't have any nudge because they wouldn't know your behavior. So, in fact, if you control the outflux of data that you provide, well, then you can sort of determine the window of free decision-making capacities that you want to preserve. And in my system, that boils down to the individual. Each of us would be able to make that decision depending on the sector, depending on the nature of the data, and so on.
Thank you very much. Gaspard, it's funny when you both explained the need of courage, the need of breaking the rules. I remember the criticism of Joseph Schumpeter against the classical economy. And his theory, more or less 100 years ago, was if the laws and the rules and the process of national classical theory in national economy would be right, then there would be no profits, no growth, no innovation, no development. And development only can come if you break the rules, if new things are invented, and if there are people. So this is because this was origin because for him the innovative entrepreneur is the most important force in economy. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I'm a typical German, I have 500 more very intelligent questions here, and I could now spend 5 more hours to go through it without mercy. But I would say I just stop here, and maybe there's enough energy in the room so that you have better questions, even better questions than these ones, which you would like to ask to our 2 speakers.
So everybody, be selfish and ask your question. Go ahead. Even in German or French, we take everything. Even Italian, you even speak Italian, you told me. Spanish. No Chinese, I think? Okay, so everything except Chinese.
Google Translate.
So who is asking the first question, the icebreaker question? Who is ready to challenge the guys? Yes, I'm coming up to you, but is there someone down here first, maybe? I'm coming. Sorry.
So, thank you very much for your contributions. My question would be to Gaspard Koenig. How do you deal in your daily life with artificial intelligence? How do you use, I don't know, Google Maps or algorithms where you see that algorithms are behind certain apps or so? How do you use them then?
Yeah, well, every one of us has to make compromises in order to get on with life. But there are options. So in the world of the internet, you have people who are taking exactly the opposite view from Silicon Valley and are building apps that are based on totally different principles. So for instance, in terms of research engine, I'm not using Google, obviously. Why? Because Google is taking into account my past researches. And I saw that very clearly once, like years ago, because I typed a question on Google, and the first article that came back to me was an article that I had written. So there is not worse in terms of cognitive bubble, right? Because obviously I would be reinforced in my own opinion. I met with researchers at Google headquarters who told me very clearly, yes, we don't want to give people what they want, but what they really need. Always the same story. So I'm using DuckDuckGo, which is a research engine, which doesn't take as other disadvantages, but doesn't take into account so if I type a research on DuckDuckGo and you type a research, we'll get exactly the same result. It doesn't apply to Google, as you know. So there are small things like that, so I could, go on different apps that I'm using or not using. Yes, I disconnect the geolocalization as often as I can on my phone and like that. So the problem is that now those sort of divergences, if you want, are only used by very aware people, activists. And I met, hacktivist with the H in Berlin, the hackers. They don't even have a smartphone. They're the best coders in town, but they use an old Nokia in order not to be tracked. So you have people who developed really a sort of paranoid spirit about it, with some reason. But my point is that it will only be the preserve of a few activists to do that, because the most convenient thing is obviously to go on Google. And again, that's why my data ownership system, it applies to everybody. Everybody has ownership on data. Everybody can choose how we would compose a smart wallet. And so it's, I think, much more democratic in terms of protection than the current legal system, which gives rights and obligations, but not ownership.
Herr Professor Lütge, wollen Sie was dazu sagen oder machen wir weiter? Alles klar. Ich bin hier oben, ich winke. Stehen Sie vielleicht auf?
Hello. Thank you very much for the talk. It's very interesting. I also have about 500 questions, but I'll settle for a two-part question if that's okay. And it's mostly for Mr. Koenig. So when you were talking about the Mechanical Turk that was playing chess, should I hold it? Yeah. Okay. You were talking about that, and you were saying that people previously thought that the mind was another kind of mechanical system. And you seem to suggest that that was the wrong idea. So the first part of the question is whether you conceive of the mind as something that is a non-mechanical system, non-mechanistic. Whether you conceive of the mind as a system that is non-mechanical or non-mechanistic. And the second part is whether you think that AI systems can ever be creative, because you kind of differentiated between human creativity and pattern recognition and following that AI systems trained on historical data are capable of. But do you think that AI systems will also be able to be creative in themselves at some point? Thank you.
Well, in fact, it's the same question. I mean, the two questions are exactly the same question, because if I think that AI is mechanistic, as you said, then I would think it's not creative because it's only repetitive. And if I say it's not mechanistic, then I open the door for something more creative. Obviously, it's not mechanistic because it's based on a number of correlations that the human mind cannot decipher. And one of the bottom line of deep learning is that researchers themselves are not able to understand the way that the machine has taken to come up with a certain decision, although they know empirically that that decision was correct, but they cannot find the reasoning. My point, though, is that there's something that AI still lacks, and it lacks something, and Yann LeCun, you know, is one of the best researchers on AI and just got the Turing Prize last week, wrote a book, I think 2 years ago, on AI, and said there's something that AI misses is common sense. And common sense comes from knowing the entirety of your environment. So AI can be very good in specific areas, but an AI a very good AI that will give you the right direction, to go from one place to another, can tell you also to cross a motorway, because it has not learned about motorways. And for that AI, motorway doesn't mean anything. It's just a patch on the computer. And I think that notion of common sense is in fact quite deep, philosophically speaking. Descartes built his system on this idea of common sense, and that's why the machine cannot replace human work. It's not a question of whether human work is creative or not. It's a question of whether human work is based on the knowledge of his environment or not. So a waiter, for instance, is a very simple job. It's not a very high-skilled job, sorry. But it's a job that the machine cannot do, because you need to understand so many things about social relationship, but why is this lady crying in the corner, why should I serve that person quicker because he seems to be a bit nervous, and you have to make those connections that a machine cannot make. And in that sense, I think that, I know about obviously works of art that are done by machine. I went to visit a guy who has recreated Bach and Chopin and so on through, algorithms. But what I think is that those algorithms are based on a human creation that involves common sense. So it's because Bach existed and it's been fed into the machine, because Chopin existed and it's been fed into the machine, and then the machine is able to do something that is sort of creative, but it's based. And the last thing is that human intelligence doesn't depend only on data and neural connection. It also depends on your body. And if you read somebody like, forgot his name now. You have a number of neuroscientists now who say, well, actually, the intelligence also comes from the guts, for instance, because it involves equilibrium. There is a word for that, scientific word. No. Well, anyway, so you see the point. No, but I forgot in French as well, so that's terrible.
Chinese then.
Okay, that will come back. Maybe I wanted to add one comment on that. There's also, you mentioned Marx already, so Marx also was the one to say that accumulation of quantity can turn into a change in quality. And I think this is exactly what we have here in AI. And I agree with you, Gaspard, that a lot of the achievements that we see from AI systems are based on collecting a lot of data, and this also rests on a lot of human work that was done in the past. But what sometimes, I mean, we have these examples of natural language processing. We see it also with translation, which is now working quite well, and we never thought this to happen. And I remember people were laughing at automatic translation like 5 years ago, maybe. And so that's why I wouldn't underestimate this accumulation of quantity, which can turn into a change in quality. And some point you have something totally different. And it seems like it comes from nowhere, but it did not.
To your the right-hand side.
I appreciate the idea of common sense or introducing even experience and gut feeling into decision making. What I was thinking about is, are we not depriving the next generations of that learning of applying common sense, of applying gut feeling, if they rely too heavily on predefined decision making? And I can even extend that. I mean, in the work environment, we appreciate older employees for their work experience and for their quality they bring to decision making. So again, if we apply that to the younger generation who rely heavily on AI, where does that bring us to?
That's exactly the concern. So in Japan or in China, you have facial recognition cameras in the classrooms, and they identify the patterns of how the kids behave to then dispatch them into the schools that are best for them. So from the birth, you're being driven by an AI system. And I see that, with my own daughter. So we had the mistake that she would get Gmail. And then I realized that Gmail offers you a number of possible answers. So you receive an email. Did you notice that? Those who use Gmail? Well, then you should quit Gmail, first of all. And then you get, you have a question, do you want to come to lunch today? And you have different suggestions. Yes, I can. Please ask me later, and so on. Which tells two things. First of all, Gmail is reading your correspondence. It was a right enshrined by the French Revolution because people were so infuriated with the possibility for the agents of the king to open your letters. So privacy of correspondence was one of the tenets of the French Revolution, and it's been totally destroyed without nobody noticing. But secondly, it tells you that it's very easy to click on one of those suggestions. And then in fact, you lose even the appetite to say something a bit different, to elaborate a private joke, to do something a bit more refined, to use some terms in the language that are not obvious, but that would introduce some nuance in your response. And by clicking on those things, you're indeed not developing that creativity or that sense of building a proper, singular, individual decision. And I do think that we have to save our kids from that. I did notice during my tour, as I said at the beginning, that all those high-level technologists I spoke to are extremely restrictive of the use of screens within their own family. And very famously, Steve Jobs banned tablets and screens from his own home. He doesn't want his kids to have access to the very material he was building to save humanity. And I'm a liberal, but I wrote a column 2 weeks ago. For the first time of my life, I suggested a ban. And I suggested to ban the use of social networks for under 16. We have to educate the kids to use their brains autonomously. And for that, we have to, you don't allow, even if you're liberal, you don't allow drugs to be sold in front of the primary school. You don't want to do that. And those social networks are just drugs. I mean, they're conceived to make you addictive. That's in order to produce data. That's how they're built. So, and the final point of that is, yes, it's about social justice. Because now those who come from educated families are more restricted in the way they use those networks and those screens. And in fact, we are reinforcing cognitive inequalities by allowing too widely the use for underage kids.
We have another. We have another question back here.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. I would like to balance or to challenge a little bit what you have said. Taking this overall assumption in a different context. I am working in the aeronautical industry, in the production area, and we use data and artificial intelligence to improve the efficiency of our production system and also, for sure, as you said, to take better decisions. And what I'm seeing is not as black and white as you have described. I really see strong collaborations between human and artificial intelligence. Because the fact that we have iPads that our blue collars can use during the production process enable them also to share their view, to empower them. And with this combination of data and the possibility we give to have a voice of our blue collars, then we can improve also the health and the safety in overall. So how do you consider that, really taking in account this kind of different example? Thank you.
Well, I'm not against AI, all right? And technophile again, and these are wonderful technologies. I think as long as they don't manipulate, for instance, I use an AI app to recognize plants in the forest. And that pure AI, you take a picture of a leaf, and it gives you the probability that it's oak or something else. And that's pure collaborative AI, but in no way does it manipulate my behavior or nudge me towards something. Just give me the information I'm looking for. And those who contribute, those who label, the millions of people who label, it's called PlantNet, who label the leaves of different trees so that we have that kind of knowledge, they do that willingly. So I'm all for it. And again, as long as those, and in terms of, for instance, in medical terms, obviously, to identify, to take the previous example, tumors on a scan, AI is very efficient and it's based on millions of examples, and why shouldn't we use it? Obviously. Now, where I draw the line, if, for instance, if in your factory, or I mean, I don't know exactly how your systems work, but if you start collecting all the data, all the consumers who take the plane, in order to nudge them towards, I mean, what could it be? I don't know, towards certain, towards certain behavior. I mean, I didn't think of that particular example, but towards certain, trends, towards, I don't know, buying more food in the plane, or towards, I don't know, okay? But if you use those data for that purpose, I would draw the line there. But in order to, improve technical work of recognizing patterns, that's what it really meant to be.
Maybe one comment from my side. I think it is crucial to somehow think of non-conformity in these issues. So AI can give you lots of good solutions or good recommendations in, let's say, I'll give a number of 85%. 85% of the cases, this is a good decision, but there are others. Maybe it's even more. Maybe it's 90. Oh, I don't know. But then this common sense, or how you call it, this somehow has to come in and say, well, wait, is this maybe a case of one of the remaining 10%? And this is, I think there's no general rule. At least I have not found it yet to say how. But you have to somehow think for yourself. And if you don't, I think that's a bad idea. And that's why it will, for example, for the education, since we talked about education now, I think it's very important to train also our kids at school and also our students to this non-conformity. Think for yourself and ask for yourself, is this something that I'm comfortable with this decision, or am I maybe not comfortable with it for some reason? And that's it. So you shouldn't always go with the flow, basically. That's what I'm saying. But it's hard to know when not to.
That makes me think about my brother-in-law who tries to get Amazon into trouble by putting products he doesn't like into the search engine to be surprised next time. Let me allow myself a question, because I'm missing the term convenience. I'm so afraid. I'm completely d'accord everything you said, but is human nature not looking for convenience? And all what you said about trust, and we only take technologies into account in everyday life if we trust it. I'm not so sure about that. I'm really afraid that we, just for the concern of convenience, we will be overruled by every application we get.
I think that exactly the right question is the appeal of convenience. And what I'm suggesting is that at least we give people tools, so that if they want to do it another way, still use technological tools, but be more autonomous and be the master of their tools and not the opposite, that at least we give them the legal and material tools to do it. That's what I'm advocating. Now, whether they choose convenience or not is a question for the civil discourse. And we have to, by writing books, by talking to your neighbors, we have to make them aware of what they're at risk of losing, and then if they make the decisions of giving up, well, then that's their decision. There's nothing I can do about it. But the least I can do is to try to, make that plea myself and be part of that discussion. But then it's a question for everybody to feel responsible for.
I would still think that trust and trustworthy AI is a very important element. I mean, when it comes, one of my favorite examples is always autonomous driving. And if you have any concern that this car might not lead you on some safe or 99% safe path, then I think people would not board it.
Tesla sells 2 million cars, and there have been 12 people killed in the US till now by Tesla cars, and they're still selling every day more.
Well, okay, but I don't want to argue against it, but how many people have been killed, let's say, in a Mercedes car, in an Opel car, in whatever? So that's what I'm saying. I would just give you one example. Why are we still having pilots on an airplane? This is it's only about trust. You could fly that totally autonomously, and much easier probably. Yeah. And so that's why I think, for example, for AI system, and I think this carries over to a number of AI systems in the future. For example, when we talk about trucks, I don't think that we will have 40-ton trucks driving totally autonomously through our countryside. I mean, with no person sitting there. I don't think we will see that, even if they can do it. But we will have someone sitting there doing other things and doing logistics and communicating with customers, maybe. And I think that will also, again, be about trust. And maybe at some point we will go beyond that. But for a long time, I think we'll have to make sure that there is this trust.
Thank you, Christoph. Stefan, I would like to come back to your question with this word of convenience. Yeah? Of course, I think we all like to be conventional. We like convenience, and so what? Of course, we would go crazy if we would question all the things that happen. If every moment we would try to do things different from others, and so on. But I come back to the question of the free will, and I look at this question of the free will from the point of view of a historian. there are many difficult questions in the world, but I think from the point of view of a historian, the question of the free will is a quite simple and easy one. Because if human beings were just conventional and nothing else, we would still sit on the trees and be apes and eat bananas, and we would be happy with this. And there is no reason, because apes are not less happy than we are. And maybe if they had known what happens with the human beings, they wouldn't have become, wouldn't change to the upright walking. But human beings have done this again and again and again, doing things which did not necessarily come from the past, from the data of the past, which were not necessarily not inevitable, and so on. You can call whatever you like it. I don't care if it's called free will, but there must be something which allows you to leave the things which were in the past, which you inherited. And the question is, do the systems of artificial intelligence and the processes, if I look at companies, I'm more afraid of processes than of artificial intelligence, or even, or maybe it's the same. Do the systems still allow us to do what the apes did when they left their trees and started upright walking?
Nice, thank you. So I got the feeling that we have to, yes, go ahead.
Because you were asking for questions in other languages.
You're right.
So we have a question in Spanish from Marisol Chavez. She's actually doing a research stay at my institute currently. So do you want to pose it, or shall we read it? I'm not so good in Spanish.
So maybe I should take my glasses. El uso ético de la inteligencia artificial corresponde constituirlo en conjunto a los emporios. Yes, genau. You can read.
The academia, enterprise.
Yeah, you can ask in Spanish. I think I can better understand than read your writing. Yeah.
So you need to write it.
No, she can ask a question in Spanish.
Go ahead.
I think I better understand than.
El uso ético de la inteligencia artificial lo tiene que constituir la academia, la sociedad civil, los emporios tecnológicos y además los medios de comunicación.
Do we have to translate it? Do you get it?
No, I don't get it.
Okay, so we do it afterwards, as I proposed. We do it afterwards in a one-to-one situation, okay? It's better, it's
I
easier.
have maybe one comment on there, because
Okay.
I think I understood it.
So go ahead.
No, give me the.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's very important to take into account all these issues. So we can only understand AI when it
Which
is
issues?
in a
You don't know what she asked.
No, I understand.
Yeah, but nobody else.
No,
Could you repeat the question, please, in English?
The question is, can we understand the
That's
the ethical use of AI only within the context of academia and of society? So it was a very general question, and I think that's very important to take into account. I think for ethical use of AI, this is not something that just some academics discuss on a small table, but I think in settings like this, in the public and with people discussing everyday issues about ethics and AI. I think this is where it starts from. This is about societal integration in these discussions. That's I think what's key to this question.
I have a comment, because that situation
Was
anything but convenient. So we chose the difficult way, asking the question in Spanish on a little paper and then trying to translate to the room. And that's something that makes us very human, and I found it very pleasant. So thank you for that.
So before we get to one-to-one discussions in an informal way, I get the honor to introduce some questions, but you have the right to choose only one of four from students from Sciences Po. There are some people in this room who studied or even teach at Sciences Po. It's the lead school for people who want to change the world, so to say, maybe. You can comment on that. I show you on the screen the questions. So it's too long, you're right. So show you the other one, it's shorter.
Okay, I take the second one. Excellent question. So, I'll just, in order to respond to that very brilliant question, I'll develop a bit what I said about data ownership. Okay. So today, when you click, and I take a very simple example, when you click on the terms and conditions, so 10 times a day of, let's say, Facebook, okay, to be very plain, you agree to provide all the value that you make, so all your data, all your pictures, all your text, your comments, your interferences, anything, and also your searches on the internet, because then you accept that Facebook puts cookies on your computer and spies on you even when you close the window of Facebook. So you accept all that in exchange of a free service. To me, that's called feudalism. It's a feudal system, just like the peasants would give all their production to the Lord in exchange of free service, protection against the war, and use of the common meal and of the well, and so on. And it took a millennia for peasants to claim property rights on their land and to be able to pass it to their inheritors and to be able to sell it, to be able to constitute a market, and so on. Now, that raises obviously a question about the value and the future of property rights in themselves, because as you know, I have a French compatriot, Thomas Piketty, who thinks private property is bad, and that it's an alienation, and so on. I'm in the school who thinks that private property is emancipating. I'm not saying it solves everything, but it's a factor of emancipation, and in fact, it gives very strong rights. Usus, fructus, abusus are very, very strong protective individual rights. So now, after 1 millennium of fighting for it, the peasants, the French Revolution gave the peasants property on the land. We're not there yet with Facebook, because we cannot negotiate that contract, cannot understand that contract, but we cannot legally negotiate that contract and say, hey, the data I provide are in fact valued much more economically than the service you provide to me. And that's something that can be priced by the market. So we can estimate that the service that Facebook gives you is, let's say, 15 quid a year. That's about the amount. And the value that you produce can be zero if you don't do anything on Facebook, but that can be hundreds of dollars. Then, obviously, Facebook also operates some work on your data. It collects the data, and then it puts them in a form where they are monetizable. But you provide the raw material, and you're not remunerated for that at all. So what I'm saying is the 3 billion profits of Facebook, most of them should go to the user, because the user shouldn't be called the user, he's a producer. He's a producer, and in that economy where data, personal data have value, monetary value, we should be compensated for the value that we produce. We cannot do that today. There is one activist in the UK, very funny guy, called Ollie Wren. And he said, since Facebook can sell my data, why shouldn't be able to do it myself? And so he took his timeline of 10 years of use of Facebook and put it on sale on eBay. The auction reached $500, which is about the amount that is estimated by the community of researchers of what those data are worth. But the interesting part of this story is not there, is that obviously Facebook stopped the auction on legal grounds, saying, look, the terms and conditions on which he clicked prevent him from doing that. And obviously, because otherwise the whole business model of that company would have been destroyed overnight. If that guy were able to sell his data, then all of us would stop to trade. I'm not saying that people should sell their data. I'm saying they should have that possibility. And they should also have the possibility not to sell them. So you should be able to say to Facebook, okay, I'm giving up all my data, I'm fine, I want to get advertisement for new shoes, I love it. But you compensate me in terms of the value I've produced for you. Now you could be able to take an opposite view and say, well, I want to use Facebook, but I want to keep my privacy complete. So I'm paying 15 quid a year in order to get the service, because it's a service that's not free. So it's just normal that I should pay for it. And you would extrapolate that logic to, in fact, our whole use of the internet. And that's what Jaron Lanier, who is a researcher by Microsoft, is pleading for. He's saying, because I'm an idealist, because I did internet in the 90s in order to enhance freedom in the world, I understand now that what we didn't understand in the 90s, that it shouldn't be free. And we thought with good intentions that it should be free for the sharing of knowledge. And now we understand that that gratuity was, in fact, the beginning of our problems. And what I'm proposing is just to introduce market economy, pure and simple, into that feudal world.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much. Stefan, if you allow, I would use the chance that we have Gaspard here to ask a last question, which has nothing to do with artificial intelligence, or maybe it has, but with horses. Because last year, Gaspard published, or in 2 other books, one about hell, and another one about a journey which he did on horse from Bordeaux, also via Augsburg, Munich, till Rome, on the back of a horse, and following the trace of the 16th century philosopher Montaigne. So my last question is, do these 3 things, artificial intelligence, hell, and horses, Montaigne, have anything to do with each other, apart that maybe riding on a horse is holidays from artificial intelligence?
Thank you. Yeah, I spent 5 months doing that horseback trip last year. And I have to say, I'm not saying that to be flattering towards my audience, but I had a fantastic welcome in Bavaria. So I crossed Bavaria, so I crossed France, then I crossed the Rhine, and then I went into Baden-Württemberg and Constance, and then to Füssen, and north to Augsburg, which was the final destination for Germany, and then back to Rome. And I had really, the crossing of Bavaria was excellent, and I was greeted with a lot of hospitality by the people and farmers along the way. So I had a very fantastic impression of that region. Now, why did I do that? Well, Montaigne, when he did his own trip, said, I don't know what I'm looking for, but I know what I want to escape from. And that was exactly my case. I indeed wanted to escape a bit from that world from that digital world that I had known too much. And I wanted to reintroduce an element of surprise, adventure, and incidents, hazard. And what better way to have incidents than to ride a horse today? You have incidents all day long. There is nothing that can be planned, nothing that goes according to plan, and you always have to improvise and to talk to people directly without the intermediary of any app or anything, saying, hey, we are 2 humans, I'm in need of hay for the horse, of a place to sleep tonight. And so you reintroduce something very anthropological, and let me tell you, it was hard, but it really feels good. And after the book on AI, I got a bit depressed by that sort of, big threat of an entirely controlled environment, controlled world. And I'm still panicking about it. And when I see us scanning our QR code in front of every door in Europe, I'm really scared of what sort of society we are building.
But on that horse, I met real people, I had real relationships. I used apps, you know, to recognize plants and to find my way. I used digital maps, but I used only a technology that I would master, that I would control. And I certainly, what I was looking for is a sense of existential freedom. I mean, there is freedom in terms of political philosophy, but then there's a sort of real freedom, what it is to be free, free from luxury, free from any extravagant needs. You know, this sort of very Stoician attitude that was shared by Montaigne to really gather your needs and live with very little. And that was very good, and it's still possible to do it, and people are still engaging. And so, in fact, humanity has not changed so much since the time of Montaigne.
Thank you very much. So, if I understand you right, you're not pledging for the horse button on Google Maps. Yeah, not yet. Just to make your story even more interesting, we do a Montesquieu celebration next week here. So maybe you come by horse next time. Yeah, I'm really pleased tonight because it was, some beer, Bavarian beer. I learned a lot, and I'm quite sure that you did also. We got a lot of Prost, santé, à la vôtre. Santé, santé. I learned a lot, as I said, and as, for example, to buy a car built before 2015, that's I'm gonna do. I learned that you're a freedom fighter, and I am labeling you as a future president. And this would be so great, to have a philosopher as president. It's like 2,500 years ago, we had philosophers as kings.
Yeah, and it didn't end well for Plato. It didn't end well for Plato, who was imprisoned.
Who cares than you? Who cares than you? Sorry. You have Jupiter now, so it's not so far. You're monarchy actually in France, so let's see what happens. 15th of November, click at LinkedIn. He's having a LinkedIn channel, and I got all your columns on LinkedIn, so you can follow him. It's very interesting. Yeah, to end the official part, thanks for this very profound discussion. I'm grateful for this tonight's gathering. Alex, thank you very much. I owe you. And let me conclude by quoting a French authority, beyond all doubt. Simone Weil, imaginary evil is romantic and varied. Really evil is gloomy, monotonous, barren, boring. Imaginary good is boring. Real good is always new, marvelous, intoxicating. I think this quote applies to tonight and all the subjects we had. Feel free to stay and have wine and words. Thank you very much.
And
as always, I forgot something. We have over there two beautiful ladies waiting to get visit. And I'm sure you are signing your book. So, and Christoph Lütge's books also. So please make them happy by buying books. It's very important. Thank you very much.